Welcome to Too Late Who Gives a Shit, the show in which I talk about old controllers that weren't popular even when they were in production. Controllers that can play Vivaldi on their haptic trackpads. The Steam controller began as part of Valve's Steam Machine project, which was basically the console version of a PC. They wanted to make couch play better for existing customers while also making it as easy as possible for console gamers to transition to Steam, something that they were already doing in large enough numbers to pressure Microsoft and Sony into releasing mid-gen Pro systems.
Hello.
Valve was also worried about the direction Windows 8 was taking and wanted to reduce their dependence on Microsoft, deriving their own Steam operating system from Linux. Valve's consoles needed a gamepad that would be able to play the full Steam library, a feat that could not be accomplished with analog sticks alone. And those are all the factors that led to the Steam controller.
One of the drivers behind us making a controller was actually VR.
Cut! Their first instinct was to use motion to simulate mouse movement, but they found it too tiring in some use cases, so they moved on to trackballs next. The appeal of the trackball was that large movements could be done on a small surface area by spinning the ball once and letting it roll, as opposed to swiping a conventional trackpad over and over. The trackball needed to be large to provide enough precision and required regular cleaning though, so Valve settled on a combination of trackpads with haptic feedback. The advantage of this setup was that the haptics could still mimic the mechanics and feeling of a spinning ball to a satisfying degree while taking up less space, being more durable, and also emulating other inputs, like analog sticks or scroll wheels. The final controller also included the motion sensors Valve initially experimented with for good measure. But are trackpads in motion genuinely better than sticks, and by how much? I've learned from past videos that some people are really stuck on the analog stick. It's hard to get empirical proof that one input type is better than another, but AimLab is about as close as I think it gets. It's a free game devoted to analyzing your aiming in great detail. If you're watching this, there's a chance that you've seen Gyro Gaming's comparison video using the software. I similarly pitted the Steam controller against other input types, testing each until the results plateaued and became consistent. Analog sticks alone yielded an average score of around 27,000. They almost require you to get right on target with a single flick, otherwise you'll have to make small corrections with an input that's terrible at doing that. The mouse averaged 34,000. I expected it to perform better, but using the inputs back to back in the same context like this makes it clear how much better the mouse really is. It's faster, more fluid, and can make adjustments more easily, which is what the Steam controller was setting out to emulate. So when trying the Steam trackpads out, I got the worst damn results by far. I managed to improve to an average of 26,000 with practice, but it goes to show the type of learning curve the pads have that even after 5 years I'm this bad at handling them. There is more fluid movement than a stick and there's more potential to improve, but it's a finicky uphill battle. Applying any pressure at all will create friction with the pad and thumb movements will take on a jerky start and stop quality. Just barely grazing the surface allows for smoother movement, but you often run out of pad before hitting the target and have to make multiple swipes. The trackball spin trick works when broadly turning the camera, but not so well when aiming like this. I'm sure someone out there has mastered the pads, but I've never found them to work well enough to aim on their own, and I don't seem to be alone in that. The consensus I've seen online is that it's best to use the pads for camera movement and then the gyro for aiming. And to my surprise, the gyro scores not only left the trackpads in the dust, but handily bested mouse input at nearly 38,000. The advantage of gyro is that there's zero friction. Unlike a mouse or stick, which have to be pushed out of a neutral position, the gyro cursor is always loose and in motion, making it faster to move from target to target in my hands. The downside is that it's less stable and easily shaken off target by trigger pulls, but this can be controlled with a little bit of focus. For the hell of it, I also tested the Switch and DS4 gyros and got even better results, along with my single highest score of 42,000. These controllers don't seem to lose calibration as often and were far more sensitive by default, forcing me to turn down the in-game settings to get the same feel as the Steam pad. It's hard to say, but Steam seems to be at a slight disadvantage here. I did some digging on this and actually found the sensors used by the controllers and, I'm gonna be honest here, I don't know how to read. All these letters and symbols are the same to me. Of course, aiming alone is just one measure. The trackpads didn't excel for me here, but they do beat sticks in most scenarios that need mouse movement. So yes, when combining the trackpads and gyro, the Steam controller can offer better, more mouse-like movement than an analog stick, but it all depends on how good you are at using them and how the game lets you use them. The best case I've found for the trackpads isn't a Steam game, but the Metroid Prime trilogy. With a mouse and keyboard hack, the game is perfectly at home on the controller. I was a huge fan of Wii Remote aiming, but Metroid missed the boat on customization options, being locked to slow turning and cursor speeds. With Prime Hack, the Steam controller trackpads allow snappier turning than a stick while the gyro does the aiming, and I can only hope that the official remaster that's been rumored about controls half as well as this. Okami has native support for the controller and allows much faster drawing on the pads or gyro, making it arguably the definitive version. But in my experience, the main benefit of the trackpads isn't accuracy but flexibility. Unlike a stick, they can easily function as buttons as well as a mouse. The D-pad directions or ABXY can be set to quadrants on the clickable pad surfaces, eliminating the need to move your thumbs from them at all. Movement is a little awkward on the left trackpad, so most people opt to use it as a D-pad and move with the analog stick instead. In this no-click mode, the haptics can simulate the feeling of a rocking D-pad with unnerving accuracy. It's hard to communicate through sound and visuals alone, but it works better than it should. The pad also enables a great toggle for gyro aiming. Instead of leaving the gyro on at all times like Splatoon, or only activating it when aiming down sights, you can enable the gyro anytime by resting a thumb on the pad. Typing prompts can be handled with greater speed and ease than a controller has ever had before, with the trackpads functioning as a split keyboard. They can also be used as virtual touchscreens with on-screen UIs and customizable icons. I can make all 9 item slots in Resident Evil 5 immediately accessible on the right trackpad, eliminating the need to fumble with the in-game menu at all. Mode shifting allows features like this to work by altering what the inputs do when a designated button or trigger is held. If there aren't enough buttons to fit all the actions of a game, you can switch to entirely different mappings on the fly and effectively double or triple the number of keys. The grip buttons on the underside are perfect for this, or for absorbing actions you don't want to reach down to the face buttons for. The triggers also double their usefulness by adding a GameCube-style click at the end, which can be mapped as a separate action. Valve's favorite use for this was to combine aiming and firing into one trigger, with the analog portion going down sights and the button firing. A fast pull still allows attacking without aiming, leaving the left trigger free to absorb 2 other inputs, in this case crouching on the analog pull and diving on the full pull. All of this is handled through Valve's software, which cuts down on latency by actually altering the controller's firmware to output the desired action directly.
And real-time firmware affords us the ability to take whatever configuration that you have at launch of the game, bake it down into the controller, so the controller, those keys, those buttons on the controller actually send those keys.
The range of customization options is dizzying, but clear enough to understand when taken one at a time. Previously, different software solutions might have been required to do these things with inconsistent success depending on the game. Having all this configuration in one place is a godsend, whether making the simplest changes like swapping the triggers around or making complex, multi-layered reworkings of an entire control scheme. So if the controller was so great, then why did it end up in the garbage dump? There's a plethora of reasons for that. The build quality didn't feel up to a first-party standard. That Valve managed to get such a fully featured controller out for $50 is impressive, but you can feel the shortcuts on it. The face buttons are mushy and too far out of reach, almost necessitating control schemes that move their actions somewhere else. To prevent accidental presses, the trackpads have to be popped down with a fair amount of force, and the grip buttons even more so. A look under the battery cover reveals that they're not buttons but clickable pockets built into the surface. They work for mode shifting, but mapping frequently used actions to them will tire the hands out right away. The bumpers are also ridiculously stiff for no good reason. The overall shape is very comfortable, but everything else is slightly off. The larger issue was probably that the controller's big strength of customization could also be a giant burden. Gaming on PC already requires a lot of tinkering with drivers, benchmarks, and settings, and it doesn't exactly need another battery of options to deal with before being able to play. With mixed results, Valve tried to cut the hassle by allowing configurations to be saved and shared. A finished configuration can be saved as a template for other games to use, or community configs can be browsed to eliminate the need to ever create any of your own. But without having decided the potentially complicated mappings yourself, these configs can be completely foreign with a high learning curve. A console will likely have vaguely familiar button layouts from game to game, but a Steam community layout is often a mystery box of tangled actions, layers, and modes. Official configurations set by the developers should be better, but somehow often make things worse. I mentioned that Okami supports the controller, but with a clumsy scheme using the trackpads to emulate analog sticks instead of a mouse. Because there are so many action layers, a change as simple as moving one button may have to be repeated 5 or 6 times to carry through all of them. Almost any community config is better, but as is usually the case, none of them were quite what I wanted and still needed tweaking. In this case, it was worth sticking through because the scheme I ended up with was great and utilized everything the controller could do. But there are plenty of games that don't really need this Steam controller and aren't worth the fuss. Any platformer, for example. The D-pad emulation might work well for quick item swaps, but when put to the test in a demanding side-scroller, the illusion falls apart pretty quickly. The pad surface is so large that even an analog stick feels better in comparison. For at least half the games in my inventory, the controller has nothing to offer over a standard gamepad, which I'm assuming most people who own a Steam controller also have. A heavy keyboard and mouse user would likely feel the same. Many of the games that can benefit are blocked from doing so by factors out of Valve's control. Most games aren't designed to accept random inputs from different controllers at once, severely limiting what otherwise could be incredible control schemes. Gyro and trackpad input work best when mapped as a mouse, which rarely ever functions alongside X input. Getting the best from the Steam controller's top features means that you either have to mode shift between controller types, or go all keyboard and give up advantages like analog movement and clear button prompts. The hardware has the potential to do anything you want, but the infrastructure doesn't exist on the game side to actually use it, and there's a limit to what Steam can force by itself. Valve invested a lot to get the controller where it is, so that it could improve a few games, cause a lot of headaches in others, and then die pitifully in the corner. It's a demonstration of the risks involved with trying to innovate and a clear case for why the controller field has stagnated so much. The modern gamepad was basically settled in 1997 and has mostly seen minor refinements since. The same could be said about keyboard and mouse, although if I really wanted to push it, I could say that it hasn't fundamentally changed since before most people watching this were born. Yes, the new versions feel better, but if you could plug this decades-old hardware into a PS5, it would play most games just fine. Once something has become standardized, it's very hard to break away from it. Your muscle memory probably makes you shudder at the thought of using a different keyboard layout, even if it might work better. It's hard for developers to adopt a new approach to controls, and it's even harder to get players to adapt. Valve's biggest mistake may have been that they were too ambitious in revolutionizing input, leaving most who tried the Steam controller more than happy to slink back to the status quo. But the failure of the hardware itself doesn't mean that Valve's larger endeavor was unsuccessful. Steam input lived on and absorbed every major gamepad, offering the same level of customization to more familiar and arguably better controllers. The criminally underutilized motion and touchpad of the DualShock 4 can work to their full potential in any game now. And Steam input can even allow universal native button prompts to appear for it and Switch controllers when the developer supports the API. It's been an absolute sea change in terms of how controllers work on a PC. That proliferation of options seems to have spurned a lot of further innovation by the community. Because Gyro can handle aiming on its own, it becomes redundant for the analog stick to function as it traditionally has, so Jib Smart came up with a new way called Flick Stick. The right stick is used to instantly point the camera in any direction. Pressing left, for example, results in a hard 90-degree turn. Something like this has the potential to be the next evolutionary step beyond gyro aim, and makes Microsoft's stick-only future look absolutely ancient in comparison. Valve didn't come up with it, but they kicked the door down, and it seems like the exact kind of community response that they were hoping to see to their efforts. The DNA of the Steam controller can also be seen in Valve's Index, which features a haptic touchpad. It may just be pure coincidence, but it's hard to look at the grip buttons and firmware-based mapping of Microsoft's Elite controller without wondering if they were looking over Valve's shoulder during the beta testing phase. In terms of continuing ripples of influence, the Steam controller was actually pretty successful. A few patents have hinted that a second version isn't entirely out of the cards, and it would be nice to have that upgrade, since the Steam controller has abilities that no other gamepad has been able to fully replace yet. But looking at this controller as well as the Wii Remote and Kinect, it seems like the lesson for developers to take away is that radical new form factors don't survive in the controller space. At least for non-VR gaming.
Oh, you died.
Oh.
Whatever lasting innovations these controllers have made have always been carried on by the familiar gamepads people already have and know. We're shackled to them. At best, it seems like you can make one major change at a time before people get turned off. But that doesn't mean that there aren't giant leaps left to make. That Valve tried when no one was asking them to and when no one else seemed willing is a tremendous credit to them as a company, but maybe things are better this way, with the spirit of their innovation evolving well beyond their own hardware. Gaben, finds a way.
I'm not wearing underwear.
Beep.